Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, if you've been following along, we've spent quite a bit of time lately, way up in the abstract world of electromagnetism, Maxwell's equations, waves, light speed, all that fundamental stuff.
Yeah, the really high-level picture.
Exactly. So today, we're kind of bringing it back down to earth. We're grounding that theory, making it practical, looking at the circuits that, well, run basically everything around us.
That's right. And our mission today is really about finding a more, let's say, efficient way to think about these things. We're diving into AC circuits. Now, historically, figuring these out involves some pretty heavy calculus.
Right. Differential equation.
Yep. So we want to understand the mathematical leap that lets us analyze these even complex alternating current networks using basically just algebra. We're shifting from those high-frequency wave behaviors to what's often called the low-frequency lumped element perspective.
Okay, lumped element. Let's unpack that a bit. Does that just mean we're kind of assuming the parts, resistors, capacitors, inductors are small?
Yeah.
Small enough that we treat them like single points where things happen, and we don't worry about, say, how long it takes a signal to get from one end of a resistor to the other?
Precisely. We're assuming the wavelength of the electrical signal is much, much bigger than the size of the circuit components themselves.
Which is usually true for everyday electronics, right?
It is for most things like radios or power supplies, yeah. And if that holds true, we can use this really powerful mathematical shortcut. You see, normally, if you have a voltage, 5D, that's oscillating like a sine wave, analyzing the circuit means solving those differential equations you mentioned, calculus.
Which, let's be honest, can be a bit of a slog if you're just trying to figure out how a basic filter works.
It really can. So the big idea, the breakthrough, is to represent that wavy function using complex numbers, specifically using the exponential form. Here, hat-v's is a complex number holding the amplitude and initial phase, and I$ is, the square root of -1.
The imaginary unit. Okay, so that's the trick. But why? Why does bringing in imaginary numbers suddenly make the calculus vanish?
Well, it's because the rules for inductors and capacitors involve how things change over time. They involve derivative.
Right, rate of change.
Exactly. And when you take the time derivative of something like a omega mathematically, you just multiply by I omega. The exponential form stays the same.
Ah, I see. So taking a derivative doing calculus in the real world becomes just multiplying by I omega in this complex number world. That's just algebra.
That's the core insight, converting differentiation into multiplication. It's the foundation for basically all modern AC circuit analysis. And it brings us to our main tool, the AC replacement for resistance. We call it impedance, usually written as $0.
Okay, impedance.
Yeah, it's simply the complex number that connects voltage and current in AC, keeping that familiar Ohm's law structure. Vi double is zero, same form, but now Vy and zero can all be complex numbers.
All right, this sounds powerful. So let's apply it. Let's look at our basic building blocks. The resistor, the inductor, and the capacitor. How does this complex algebra work for them?
Okay, let's start with the inductor. Think of it as just a coil of wire. Physically, what it does is resist changes in current flow. The voltage across it is related to how fast the current is changing, Vi double L frac di dt.
There's that derivative again.
Right. But now, using our complex exponential trick, dti just becomes multiplication by I omega. So the relationship Vi double L frac di turns directly into I omega I. If we rearrange that into the VIAZ form, we find the impedance of the inductor is Z ball I omega L.
Okay, Z ball is I omega L. So the impedance is purely imaginary. It's got that factor of by $1. What does that mean physically?
That I is crucial. It tells us about timing, about phase. It signifies a 90-degree phase shift between the voltage and the current. For an inductor, because it fights the change in current, the voltage across it peaks before the current does. Is to build up first.
So the voltage leads the current by 90 degrees.
Exactly. Voltage leads current by 90 degrees. And notice it also depends on frequency, omega. If omega is 0, like in DC, the impedance ZLR is 0. An ideal inductor is just a wire for DC, a short circuit. But the impedance goes up as frequency increases.
Makes sense. It resists fast changes more strongly. Okay, what about the capacitor? Two parallel plates storing charge.
Right. For a capacitor, the voltage is related to the stored charge. $5 equals QC2R, and the current is how fast that charge is changing.
1 equals dq dt/ui.
If you work through the math with complex exponentials.
Let me guess, the derivative pops out in I omega again.
It does, but this time it ends up relating $20 to $5 in a way that gives us the impedance Z01 I omega su.
1 over I omega c.
Yeah, and sometimes it's easier to write that using $1's IAE, so it's AAEOA. Now the dollar is effectively negative, or in the
So
denominator.
the phase shift is flipped.
Exactly. The minus sign means the voltage now lags behind the current by 90 degrees. The current has to flow first to charge up the plates before the voltage builds up across them.
Okay, so inductor, I omega AL, voltage leads by 90. Capacitor,
Mm,
$1 I omega C or I omega C voltage, lags by 90. And the impedance goes down as frequency increases for the capacitor.
right. High frequencies pass easily, looks like a short circuit. But for DC, the impedance is infinite, an open circuit. Capacitors block DC.
Got it. And the simplest one, the resistor.
Dead simple. Ohm's law, VAIO holds directly. There's no time derivative involved. So
Yeah.
the impedance is just ZOR rate.
Purely real. No dollar, no phase shift.
None at all. Voltage and current are perfectly in sync.
Okay, wow. So we've got this unified algebraic language using complex impedance for all three passive components. That's pretty neat. Now, what about the things that actually supply the energy, the generators?
Good point. We need to distinguish between these passive elements, L, C, R, that just respond to voltage and current, and the active elements, like generators. Generators are what provide the push, the electromotive force, or EMF, usually written as math-cal.
And AC generators typically work how?
Usually by spinning a coil in a magnetic field. As the coil rotates, the magnetic flux through it changes, and Faraday's law tells us this induces a voltage. Because it's spinning smoothly, the induced voltage varies sinusoidally.
Right, so that's mechanically generated AC voltage. How's that different conceptually from just, say, a battery?
Well, a simple chemical battery provides a more or less constant DC voltage across its terminals due to chemical reactions. The AC generator produces a voltage that's constantly changing in time, driven by that changing magnetic flux.
Okay.
Both provide an EMF, but the nature is different.
Okay, so now we have the parts. Passive L, C where their impedances, and an active generator providing the AC voltage. How do we figure out what happens when we connect them all together in complicated ways?
This is where we bring in Kirchhoff's rules. You probably remember them from DC circuits.
Yeah, the loop rule and the junction rule.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is they still work for AC circuits, provided we use our complex impedances, and stick to that low-frequency lumped element assumption. They're really just practical applications of Maxwell's equations in this simplified regime.
So, the first rule, the junction rule.
That one's straightforward. Conservation of charge. At any point where wires meet, a junction or node, the total current flowing in must equal the total current flowing out. Sum in equals $. That always holds.
Okay, charge doesn't just appear or disappear. Makes sense. What about the loop rule?
The loop rule says if you go around any closed path, any loop in the circuit, the sum of all the voltage drops, the $ times Z values, across each element must add up to 0. Sum Vn equals a Lowler, or, put another way, the sum of voltage drops equals the generator's EMF in that loop.
Now, you said this one relies on the lumped element idea.
Yes, critically. It relies on the assumption that the magnetic fields created by the currents are essentially confined inside the components, particularly the inductors. If the frequency gets very high, or the circuit loops get physically large,
Then the changing magnetic fields between the components start to matter. They induce extra voltages.
precisely. Those induced EMFs in the wiring itself break the simple loop rule. That's when you have to ditch Kirchhoff and go back to Maxwell's full equations. That's where wave behavior starts to dominate.
But for our normal circuits, low frequency, small components, Kirchhoff's rules are our friends.
Absolutely. And because they are algebraic rules,
Are
some I equals ZO1, some IZ equals ZO1, some IZ equals 1, they let us combine impedances just like we combine resistances in DC.
So impedances in series just add up. Z series equals Z1 plus Z22.
Yep. And impedances in parallel combine with that reciprocal formula, $1 parallel plus 1Z1 plus 1Z22.
So we can take really complex networks, like maybe a bridge circuit, and just break them down step by step using algebra with these complex impedances.
Exactly. It's incredibly powerful. It turns a potential calculus nightmare into a manageable algebra problem.
Okay, this impedance Zillia-Zilder is clearly central, but you mentioned earlier that Zillia levels were purely imaginary. I omega L and $1, I omega C. Does that imaginary nature tell us something deeper about energy? Like what happens to the energy going into an inductor or capacitor? It's not like a resistor, right?
That's a fantastic question, and it gets to the heart of what the complex parts mean. You're right, it's completely different from a resistor. The purely imaginary impedance of ideal inductors and capacitors tells us they are non-dissipative.
Non-dissipative,
Yeah,
meaning they don't waste energy as heat.
exactly. A resistor takes electrical energy and turns it irreversibly into heat. That energy is lost from the electrical system. Inductors and capacitors, ideally, don't do that. They store energy.
How did that work with the AC cycle?
Well, think about an inductor. As current increases, it stores energy in its magnetic field. Then, as the current decreases in that part of the AC cycle, it releases that energy back into the circuit. Same idea for a capacitor, storing energy in its electric field.
So they borrow energy for half a cycle and give it back on the other half.
Kind of, yeah. More like a quarter cycle storage, quarter cycle release, then reverse for the other half. The key point is that over a full cycle, the average power delivered to an ideal inductor or capacitor is zero. They just hand the energy back and forth.
Whereas the resistor is constantly consuming power averaged over a full cycle.
Right. The average power dissipated is related only to the resistance. This leads us to the general form of impedance, which combines both effects. Zero is R plus IX del.
Ah, okay. So any impedance can be broken down into a real part and an imaginary part.
Precisely. Real is the resistance, the real part. This is the part that corresponds to actual energy dissipation, averaged over time. The average power loss P wrangle is proportional only to this $3.
And the I loss part.
$6 is called the reactance, the imaginary part. This represents the energy storage and release mechanism. The non-dissipative part associated with inductors, $6 is U equal L, and capacitors, $6 or -1 omega C.
So $6 could be positive, inductive, or negative capacitive.
Correct. And the total reactance, $6 in a circuit, is just the sum of all the individual inductive and capacitive reactances. The beauty is the average power consumed only depends on the real part, $2. The reactive part, Ibex dollar, influences the phase between voltage and current and handles that temporary energy storage, but it doesn't consume power on average.
That's a really clean separation. R for dissipation, X for storage, and phase shift. Okay, let's push this idea further. You mentioned analyzing complex networks. So what about something really extended, like an infinite chain? Let's say we have a ladder network.
Right.
An impedance Z1 all in series, then Z2 going down to ground, then another Z all to another Z repeated forever.
Ah, the infinite ladder network, a classic and very insightful thought experiment. To analyze that, we use the concept of characteristic impedance. Let's call it Z dollars.
Characteristic impedance, what's that?
It's the impedance you would measure looking into the input terminals of the infinite ladder. Now here's the trick. Because the ladder is infinite, if you add one more section, one $1 and one Z2 onto the front of it, it's still the same infinite ladder.
It doesn't change the overall impedance because it's already infinite.
Exactly. That self-similarity lets you set up an equation. The impedance looking in, $Z must be equal to $Z in series with the parallel combination of Z22 and the rest of the infinite ladder, which also has impedance $Z.
Okay, so Z is Z1 plus Z2 text in parallel with Z0. That gives an equation we can solve for Z.
Right. And when you do this for a ladder made of, say, inductors for $Z and capacitors for $Z, omega C, something really remarkable happens when you solve for $Z.
What's that?
You find that the mathematical nature of $Z depends critically on the driving frequency to megadollar. There's a specific frequency, a critical frequency to megadollars, which depends on L and C, specifically megadollars for this configuration, that acts as a dividing line.
Okay, a cutoff frequency. What happens above and below it?
Well, case one, if your driving frequency omega is less than this omega dollar, the solution for $Z turns out to be purely real. A positive resistance.
Purely real. So the infinite LC ladder looks just like a resistor to the source if the frequency is low enough.
Exactly. Which means it accepts energy, power flows into the ladder and travels down it continuously, getting passed from section to section.
Okay, in case two, if omega is greater than omega del,
Then the solution for $Z becomes purely imaginary.
purely imaginary. So now it looks like just an inductor or a capacitor.
Right. And what did we say about purely imaginary impedances and power?
They don't dissipate average power, they store and return energy.
Precisely. So above the cutoff frequency, the infinite LC ladder doesn't absorb any net energy from the source. The energy you try to send in essentially gets reflected back. The signal doesn't propagate down the line. Its amplitude dies off very rapidly as you move away from the input.
Wow. So just by changing the frequency, the same physical network transforms from looking like a conductor of energy to looking like a barrier.
That's the essence of a filter. This specific LC ladder is a low-pass filter. Frequencies below omega dollars are in the pass band they go through. Frequencies above omega dollars are in the stop band they get blocked or severely attenuated.
And the sharpness of that transition and where omega dollar lies depends on the L and C values.
Correct. And you can design different configurations for high-pass filters, blocking low frequencies, passing high, band-pass filters, passing only a specific range, or band-stop filters. This frequency-dependent behavior of impedance is fundamental to, well, almost all of electronics. Radio tuning, audio equalizers, signal processing, it all relies on this principle.
Before we wrap up, maybe we should quickly touch on the fact that real-world circuits aren't always just ideal L's, C's, and R's.
Hmm.
What about things like mutual inductance or active devices like transistors?
Good point. Yes, there are other effects like mutual inductance, where one coil's changing field affects another, and components like vacuum tubes or transistors, which can be highly nonlinear and amplify signals. But remarkably, even for these complex devices, when we analyze their behavior with small AC signals, we often create linear equivalent circuits.
Meaning we model their AC response using combinations of effective resistances, capacitances, and sometimes controlled sources, even if the underlying physics is more complicated.
Exactly. We find a linear approximation that works well for small AC signals around a particular operating point. And once we have that linear equivalent circuit, guess what?
We can use complex impedances and Kirchhoff's rules all over again.
You got it. The framework is incredibly versatile.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together then. What's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive into AC circuits?
I think the main point is the power of this mathematical abstraction, using complex numbers to represent oscillating voltages and currents. This turns the calculus of derivatives into the simple algebra of multiplying by I omega. That leads directly to the concept of complex impedance. 0Z is R plus IXC.
Right, where R is the resistance, the part that dissipates energy as heat, and X is the reactance, the imaginary part due to inductors and capacitors, which handles energy storage and phase shifts, but doesn't dissipate power on average.
Exactly. And understanding how this impedance C changes with frequency is the key. It allows us to predict how circuits will behave, how they'll respond differently to different frequencies, which is precisely what allows us to build filters and shape signals. Kirchhoff's rules still apply in this complex algebraic framework, letting us analyze intricate networks.
It's really elegant how the math maps so directly onto the physical behavior, real part for power loss, imaginary part for energy storage and phase. Okay, time for our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. We talked about that infinite LC ladder, the low-pass filter. Below the cutoff frequency to megadollars, its characteristic impedance, Z dollars was purely real, like a resistor, allowing energy to flow down the line. Above the megadollars, Z dollars became purely imaginary, reflecting energy.
Where are you going with this?
Well, think about what happens right at the input terminals. If you try to drive that line above the cutoff frequency, the line looks purely reactive. It won't accept average power. But you're still applying a voltage, and presumably some current is flowing back and forth at the input. Where does the instantaneous power in times AA actually go if the infinite line itself refuses to absorb it on average? What's happening dynamically right at that interface?
Ah, that's a good one. Something to definitely mull over.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of AC circuits.